Hello, fellow reader, and Happy New Year! 2024 has come to a close, which means we get to recap on everything we've read this year. I've been fortunate to read about 81 books. I need friends. It's a lot of books, so it's really hard to pick a favorite, but I'm going to give you my top 5 from independent authors and my top 5 from mainstream authors. I know I talked about it before, but I need to talk about it again because A Songbirds Tale by Tiffani Sahara was one of my favorite epic fantasy reads of 2024. Very relatable characters. It's a really touching tale and very well written. I also play D&D, which is another reason why I'm partial to this one because there are so many elements of D&D in this book that I adored. It was really easy to get swept away in my imagination. Songbird is just simply adorable and I love her so much and I want to be her best friend. For science fiction, Veles by P.J. Marie. This novel takes place in a post-apocalyptic Earth after the destruction of civilization and basically an entire reshaping of the Earth as we know it. Mankind reverts back to hunter-gatherers. I loved the messaging about how we need to be better stewards of our planet. A lot of science fiction novels, if you read science fiction, and a lot of people are like, books shouldn't be political. All books are political, okay? It peels back the layers of mankind and shows us that we should be better about not being so greedy all the time. I also really enjoyed that there was this religion, this post-apocalyptic religion that was used as a means of control over the population. And the god is named Veles. There's a little splash of magic and the supernatural. It was unexpected. Overall, I really enjoyed the messaging and I felt like this book was very well written. I will say caveat that it was a little bit slow in the beginning, but it gets going and it was a wonderful ride. Satan and the Adventure of the Blue-Eyed Freak by Bendici. We all know. I've already talked about this before, why this is my favorite. It's so sarcastic, it's so witty, it's so humorous. If the title doesn't give it away, our main character is Satan. But he's more of a Lucifer TV show type Satan versus biblical Satan. I place this one in the contemporary fiction with a splash of supernatural genre. There were so many times that I physically laughed out loud while reading this book that a lot of people were looking at me like, what's so funny? There are so many poignant lines that made me stop and think and reflect. I've always been taught that in order to get a point across, it's easier to do it with a dash of humor. There's more than a dash. By far one of my favorite reads. These next books, I do have the physical copies to them, but I loaned them out to my friends because I thought they were that amazing and more people needed to read it. Spellcaster Wildcard by Nikki, Jefford. So good. Young adult urban fantasy novel. In the United States, where magic and the supernatural exist. So there are different creatures like werewolves, vampires, witches, and there's a television show called Spellcaster, which is very similar to our The Voice, where people go and they try to show off how good they are at different magics. And our main character gets invited on the show. I really don't want to give away too much, just know that it was very well written and I thoroughly enjoyed it and I cannot wait for the next book because the cliffhanger on that was... I'm still hanging. Next is The North Tower by Michelle N. Haygood. So good. If you are a fan of Harry Potter, you have to absolutely pick up this book because it is fan-freaking-tastic. I grew up with Harry Potter. Harry Potter was one of my favorite series growing up. And then when I read this one, I was just like, oh, hey, this is kind of like Harry Potter. But the magic system actually makes sense. There's limitations to the magic. That was something that always bothered me with Harry Potter. It's just, they just say words. And just depending on how many, like, how do you know if a wizard's more powerful than another? Just like their wand? Or they never fully explain that. But in the North Tower, if you can wield magic, it's because you have a specific organ. Your magic can be stolen from you, and everybody has different levels of magic based on this organ. I really loved how the magic just flows through the body into the wand, and the way that that was described was just amazing. The reason why I compared it to Harry Potter is because our main character goes to a magical school. I personally think it's better than Harry Potter. So The North Tower doesn't quite have a slow burn romance in it, but I feel like since it's a series of 3 and there is a second book, it will develop into that because there is a little bit of a dark, brooding male character. I really loved this book and it's definitely one that I will reread in the future. And finally, an honorable mention. I know I said 5, but I couldn't, so here's number 6. It's The Secret Life of Jonathan Sendel by Jeffrey Ashkin. This one is a science fiction mystery novel. This book had so many twists and turns. When I thought that I had a grasp on where this book was going or who the murderer was, it got turned on its head and I was proven an idiot. This book was fantastically written and I loved the little aspects on the wealthy class and how they can possibly get away with certain things because of their wealth. This book will keep you guessing. Now on to the mainstream authors. Jade City by Fonda Lee. The book was stellar. The entire series itself is stellar. If you don't know this about me, I actually lived in Hong Kong for a little bit. This book just brought me right back to Hong Kong. If Hong Kong was a fantastical city, that would be Jade City. The magic is unique, the characters are so thoroughly fleshed out, and the way that Fonda Lee writes fight sequences is mind-blowing. Just the choreography with the martial arts and the magic and the political intrigue. This entire series is a must read for anybody who loves fantasy. Jade City. Another must read is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This is science fiction, by the way. Pierce Brown absolutely knows how to write military fighting war sequences. From the very first page, I was pulled in. The first book was similar to the Hunger Games in that there's a class system, class divide, and people are divided based on color. Usually that color shows up in their color of their hair or their eyes, and our main character rises literally red. He's red, the lowest bottom of the rung, and rises all the way up to gold, which is the cream of the crop. Basically the gods of Mars, because science fiction, this takes place on other planets in our solar system. I loved the ties to Greek and Roman mythology with the gods and Olympus. Just absolutely fantastic, and every single person who loves science fiction needs to read this. There were a few moments that I was just on the edge of my seat, worried about a favorite character possibly maybe dying, because some of them do and some of them don't. And so it's just, it was a wild ride, and thoroughly enjoyed reading this entire series. Could not recommend it anymore to anybody else. Next is Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. This is a historical fiction. This follows the true story of Tan Yuxian, who was a female physician in 15th century China. Again, same as Jade City, I lived in China, so China has a special place in my heart. I loved how Lisa was able to craft a story around true events from Lady Tan, and just how powerful of a figure she was for women during a time period where being a woman wasn't necessarily a good thing. She was in a very patriarchal society, the men led everything, and women were secondary creatures. Lisa C., our author, was very respectful of the 15th century mindset and didn't place her own biases on Lady Tan, because Lady Tan, during the time period, would have definitely accepted her role. She might have complained a little bit, but she would see reason in why her role is what it was, versus who Lisa, who is a modern day woman, probably would have been like, girl, you're being oppressed. I felt Lisa did a very, very good job in portraying this book kind of like a diary entry for Lady Tan's life. We read this in my book club. Everybody loved it. It's a really great read. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. If you guys have been following me long enough, you know Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors, so I couldn't not read one of his books this year. And Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is another beautiful, beautiful story. The way that Brandon Sanderson is able to craft the worlds that these stories take place in is just mind-blowing. The religions, the relationships, the culture, all of it is so cohesive, and he does a fantastic job drawing you into the story, which is why he's my favorite. Brandon Sanderson writes a lot of epic fantasy and science fiction, and he isn't really known to have a whole lot of how some people would say like romance in a novel. So Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is different because this one revolves a little bit more around a love story. If you read Tress of the Emerald Sea, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is similar in that it is told from the narrative view of Hoyd, which is one of my favorite characters that Brandon Sanderson has created. I really don't want to give away too much. I just know that it is a beautiful tale and it was one of my favorites, and I hope that you give it a read. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I think this book would be classified as like a historical fiction fantasy, as it is based on Greek mythology. The poetry, the prose of this book is just absolutely stellar. It is beautifully crafted. This book will draw you in emotionally and make you cry.
Their tears will be real today.
So if the title doesn't give it away, it follows the story of Achilles, but told from the point of view of Patroclus, his best friend, starting from a young age and then ending ultimately at the War of Troy, which if you've seen the movie, Brad Pitt, you know how that goes. So we all know the story, but it was really, really great to get a different perspective, different point of view into the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. To me, the writing of this book was akin to the Iliad or the Odyssey. It was very much an epic poem. Madeline did a fantastic job with her research to make sure that she was staying true to the original mythology, but also giving us more about Achilles. He's not just some super powerful guy who got shot in the ankle. So it was my sister who recommended that I read this, and I'm very grateful she did because it was fantastic. And since I did it for independent authors, I have to do it again for the mainstream authors. My Lady Jane by 3 authors, Cynthia, Brodi, Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. Historical fiction, fantasy. It was so good. This was a cozy fantasy for me. It tells a new story of the Tudors and Jane Grey, but with a little bit more of a supernatural aspect to it. In this retelling, there are 2 different peoples. In the history, we know that it was between the Catholics and the Protestants, whereas in this story, it is between people who are called Verities and those who are called Ethians. Ethians are the ones who can change into an animal form, whereas Verities are just normal humans. The story has a happy ending with a lot less beheadings. It's fantastic. And it's also why it's an honorable mention on my list. I thought it was very good. What was your favorite read of 2024? Let me know in the comments. 2025 is going to be filled with way more reading as I have all of these independent authors to read through. I'd also like to invite anybody who'd like to help me read independent authors' books by clicking the PDF in my bio. There are over 1,600 authors in there, all organized by genre. You could check it out, maybe find your next read. And as always, happy reading.